What if I told you that Trump just took the first major step in dismantling some of the most aggressive gun control regulations we've seen in years? I'm talking about a direct order to review, challenge, and possibly wipe out rules that have been strangling the Second Amendment since 2021. For gun owners, this could be a defining moment. For years, we've watched as the ATF, backed by anti-gun politicians, pushed rule after rule, regulation after regulation, all in the name of safety. But we all know what that really means. It's never been about safety. It's always been about control. Now, Trump has put his foot down. He's ordered a top-down review of every major gun-related restriction from the last 4 years. If you think this is just talk, think again. There's a deadline, there's a team, and there's a real chance this could change everything. For the past 4 years, we've seen the government push an aggressive anti-gun agenda. We're talking about sweeping bans on things like pistol braces, the reclassification of ghost guns, and stricter background check policies that target law-abiding citizens instead of criminals. It's been one attack after another, using the ATF as their personal enforcer. We saw it with bump stocks. One day they were legal, and the next they were criminalized. No vote, no law, just an agency deciding that millions of gun owners were now felons overnight. The same thing happened with pistol braces, and if they had their way, it would have been even worse. The ATF has been systematically making up new rules, forcing gun shops to close, and turning legal gun owners into criminals over minor paperwork errors. Now, Trump is stepping in. He's ordered his Attorney General, Pam Bondi, to review every single rule, restriction, and regulation on the books since 2021. This isn't just a minor adjustment. It's a complete reassessment of the ATF's authority and whether these rules even hold up under the Supreme Court's Bruen decision. Why does this matter? Because Bruen changed everything. The court ruled that any gun law must be consistent with America's historical tradition of firearm regulation. That alone could be the key to rolling back some of the worst restrictions we've ever seen. This review isn't just political posturing, it has real legal weight, and if it plays out the way I think it might, the gun grabbers are in for a rude awakening. Let's talk about what Trump's executive order actually does. First, it puts Pam Bondi in charge of a full-scale review of every major gun regulation passed since 2021. She has exactly 30 days, until March 7th, to complete this review. That means she's looking at every single rule, policy, and restriction that has been imposed, and she has to determine if they align with the Second Amendment. Now, here's why this is a big deal. This review isn't just about looking at gun laws and saying, well, this seems fair, or this one isn't too bad. She has to weigh everything against the Bruen decision, which means she must prove that these restrictions align with historical gun laws in America. And let me tell you, most of these modern restrictions have no historical precedent whatsoever. Take pistol braces, for example. The ATF decided overnight that something gun owners had legally owned for years was suddenly illegal. Where's the historical justification for that? There isn't one. Same goes for ghost guns. The government wants to track every firearm, but the Second Amendment was never about government oversight. In fact, the Founding Fathers would have laughed at the idea that the government should know what guns you own. Then there's the issue of FFLs. Under Biden, the ATF cracked down on federal firearms license holders like never before. If a gun shop made even a minor clerical error, they could have their license revoked. Some FFLs voluntarily gave up their licenses because the pressure was just too much. That's not regulation, that's intimidation. Another massive issue is suppressors. Right now, suppressors are classified under the National Firearms Act, meaning you have to go through a ridiculous process to legally own one. But suppressors aren't some Hollywood assassin tool. They're basic safety equipment that protects your hearing. Imagine if we actually removed them from the NFA. Gun owners could buy them like any other firearm accessory, and shooting ranges across the country would be quieter, safer, and more enjoyable. So what's next? Bondi and her team will comb through all of this. If they follow the legal standards set by the Bruen decision, then a lot of these rules won't hold up. But will she actually take this as far as she should? That's the question we need to be asking. Because this executive order has the potential to be one of the most pro-Second Amendment moves in modern history, if it's executed correctly. Now, let's get into what could actually be overturned. The ATF has been the tip of the spear when it comes to infringing on gun rights, and this executive order takes direct aim at some of the most outrageous policies they've pushed in the last 4 years. First up, ghost guns, and homemade firearms. The ATF decided to rewrite the definition of what counts as a firearm, specifically going after unfinished frames and receivers. Their goal? To track every single privately made firearm in the country. But let's be real. The Second Amendment was never meant to come with a government registry. For centuries, Americans have been building their own firearms at home, and it was never an issue. There's no historical precedent for banning homemade guns, which means under Bruen, the ATF's rule could be wiped out completely. Then we have the so-called gun show loophole. Anti-gun groups love to spread the lie that gun shows are some lawless free-for-all where anyone can buy a firearm with no background check. That's complete nonsense. If you've been to a gun show, you know that nearly every seller is an FFL, meaning they already conduct background checks. Are there private sales? Yes. And guess what? That's perfectly legal. It always has been. The ATF tried to push for mandatory background checks on all transactions, even between private citizens, which is a direct attack on private gun ownership. That could be another rule that gets the axe. Next, the FFL crackdown. From 2021 to 2024, the ATF has revoked more FFL licenses than in any previous administration. The Biden administration weaponized the ATF using a zero-tolerance policy that shut down gun dealers over minor paperwork errors. Some gun shops were targeted simply for making a clerical mistake on a form, mistakes that had zero impact on public safety. These weren't criminals, and they weren't breaking the law in any meaningful way. But Biden's ATF wanted them gone, and they used whatever excuse they could find. If this executive order is taken seriously, that policy could be reversed, allowing many of these FFLs to get their businesses back. And then there's the big one, reclassifying suppressors and NFA items. We've been forced to go through an absurd process just to get a suppressor, even though they're legal and wildly beneficial for gun safety. This review could challenge their placement under the NFA, potentially making suppressors as easy to buy as scopes or bipods. That alone would be a game changer. If there's one thing that makes this executive order more than just political theater, it's the Bruen decision. For those who don't know, the Supreme Court's ruling in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruen changed everything. It established that any gun law must be justified based on the historical tradition of firearm regulation in the United States. In simple terms, if a regulation wouldn't have existed at the time of the Founding Fathers, it's probably unconstitutional. This is a nightmare for the anti-gun crowd, because most modern gun control laws have no historical basis whatsoever. The government can't just pass new restrictions under the guise of public safety anymore. They actually have to prove that similar restrictions existed at the time the Second Amendment was written. And guess what? They don't. There's no historical tradition of banning pistol braces. There's no precedent for requiring background checks on private sales. There's certainly no historical justification for the ATF deciding that bump stocks, suppressors, or certain rifle configurations should be banned at will. That's why Trump's order is so significant. It forces Bondi and her team to go through each and every restriction and ask, does this law hold up under Bruen? If the answer is no, it should be scrapped. This is especially important when it comes to ongoing legal challenges. Right now, there are cases being fought in the courts over age restrictions for firearm purchases, magazine bans, and even the right of nonviolent felons to own guns again. If Trump's order sets the standard that all new regulations must pass the Bruen test, it could be a domino effect, leading to massive rollbacks of gun control laws across the country. This isn't just about undoing what Biden did. This could reshape Second Amendment law for a generation. If the legal team behind this follows through, we could see some of the most oppressive gun restrictions struck down permanently. The question is, will they go all the way? Now, here's where things get really controversial. One of the biggest legal battles coming out of this executive order could be whether nonviolent felons should have their gun rights restored. And before anyone jumps to conclusions, let's break this down. Under federal law, if you're a convicted felon, you lose your right to own a firearm, permanently. It doesn't matter if your crime was violent or not. It doesn't matter if you've served your time and gone decades without another offense. You're stripped of your Second Amendment rights for life. But thanks to the Bruen decision, that's being challenged. We've already seen multiple cases where courts ruled that the government can't permanently strip someone's gun rights without strong historical justification. One man, who had committed a nonviolent crime back in 2006, was arrested in 2023 for possessing a firearm. But guess what? The court threw the case out. Why? Because there's no historical precedent for banning all felons from owning guns indefinitely. In fact, back in the early days of America, if you served your sentence, your rights, including your gun rights, were restored. So should all nonviolent felons get their gun rights back? It's a tough question, but here's my take. If you trust someone enough to release them back into society, then they should have all of their constitutional rights. If they're still a danger, why are they out? You can't have it both ways. Trump's executive order will force a review of cases like these. And if the courts continue to apply Bruen, we may see a future where millions of Americans have their gun rights reinstated. Whether that's good or bad, that's up for debate. Another major fight that could be shaped by this executive order is whether 18 to 20-year-olds should be able to buy handguns. Right now, federal law says you have to be 21 to buy a handgun from a licensed dealer. Some states have even tried to push the age for buying any firearm to 21. But here's the problem. There is no historical precedent for that restriction. Think about it. At 18, you can vote. You can serve in the military. You can be sent to war, handed a fully automatic rifle, and told to defend your country. But when you come home, suddenly the government decides you're not mature enough to buy a handgun. It makes no sense. This argument is already making its way through the courts. In Texas, a judge struck down the federal handgun age limit, saying it violated the Second Amendment under Bruen. Other states are seeing similar challenges, and if this executive order pushes the issue, we could see a nationwide ruling that restores gun rights to 18-year-olds across the board. Here's the thing. Age-based gun restrictions were not a thing when the Second Amendment was written. Back then, 16-year-olds were expected to own and carry firearms. The idea that someone suddenly becomes responsible at 21 but not at 20 years and 11 months is absurd. If Trump's executive order leads to a full review of this policy, it could set up a Supreme Court case that permanently kills the 21-plus handgun ban. That would be a huge victory for young gun owners and a major blow to anti-gun states trying to push these restrictions even further. Now, before we start celebrating, let's talk about the one thing that could screw all of this up. Pam Bondi. She's the one leading this review, and quite frankly, I don't trust her. Bondi has been wishy-washy on gun rights for years. Back when Trump made that infamous comment about taking the guns first, due process later, Bondi was right there, backing him up. She said all the right things about the Second Amendment, but when it came down to real action, she's been unreliable at best. That's what worries me about this entire process. If Bondi takes this executive order seriously, if she really applies the Bruen standard, then we could see some of the biggest victories for gun rights in modern history. But if she half-asses it, or worse, purposely drags her feet, then this entire thing could be nothing more than political theater. And let's not forget, she's not working alone. Vincent Haley, Trump's policy advisor, is also involved. The problem is, we don't know how much influence he has. Is he just there for optics, or is he actually going to push this review in the right direction? This could be a turning point for the Second Amendment. But the success of this executive order depends entirely on whether Bondi and her team actually do the job right. If they don't, then all of this will have been for nothing, and that's something every gun owner should be paying close attention to. So what happens now? Well, Pam Bondi and her team have until March 7th to go through every single regulation, restriction, and executive order that's been placed on gun owners since 2021. If this review is done correctly, it could lead to the biggest rollback of gun control measures in modern history. But that's a big if. There are a few different ways this could play out. Best case scenario, the Bruen decision is applied correctly, and we see massive changes, repealing bans on pistol braces, ghost guns, and maybe even removing suppressors from the NFA. If they go even further, we could see age restrictions overturned and challenges to permanent gun bans for nonviolent felons gaining serious momentum. That's what should happen if they stick to the Constitution. Worst case scenario, Bondi doesn't go far enough. Maybe she chips away at some regulations but leaves the big ones in place. Maybe the Biden-era rules get softened instead of outright repealed. That's the real danger here. Half measures that make it seem like a win when it's really just damage control. So the question now is, will this actually change things? Or is it just another political stunt? We'll know soon enough. This executive order has the potential to be a monumental shift in the fight for gun rights. It's not just about reversing what Biden did, it's about setting a legal precedent that stops future infringements before they even start. If done right, this could be the moment where the government finally has to accept that the Second Amendment is not up for negotiation. But we have to stay engaged. We can't just sit back and assume this will work out in our favor. We need to hold Bondi and her team accountable. If they don't go far enough, we call them out. If they try to water this down, we make noise. Gun owners have been on defense for too long. Now is the time to push forward. So I want to hear from you. What's the biggest change you're hoping to see from this? Do you think Bondi will actually follow through, or are you skeptical? Let me know in the comments. And if you appreciate content like this, make sure to subscribe. Stay armed, stay informed, and as always, hold the line.